Good morning, South Jersey. This is Michael Schurman, WMGM News, and I've got news for you. There won't be any stories this morning about the gambling palaces in Casino City, the boys on North Georgia Avenue, or the shenanigans down at City Hall. Only one news item today, a Christmas story, a gift from me to you. The story about a man and his unusual rendezvous with faith. It was originally prepared by United Press International's Lewis Castle. The author is unknown. It's almost as though this story materialized out of nowhere. Now, the man I'm talking about was not a Scrooge. He was a kind, a decent, a mostly good man, generous to his family, a man who was upright in his dealings with other men. But he just couldn't believe in all that incarnation stuff, which the churches proclaim at Christmas time. It just didn't make sense to him, and he was too honest to pretend otherwise. He couldn't swallow the Jesus story about God coming to earth as a man. He told his wife he was sorry to distress her, but he wasn't going to church on Christmas Eve. He said he'd feel like a hypocrite. He'd much rather stay home, but he'd wait up for the family, so he stayed and the family went to the midnight service. Shortly after the family drove away in the car, snow began to fall. He went to the window to watch the flurries getting heavier and heavier. And then he went back to his fireside chair and sat down and began to read his newspaper. Minutes later, he was startled by a thudding sound, and then another, and another. At first, he thought somebody must be throwing snowballs against his living room window. But when he went to the door to investigate, he found a flock of birds huddled miserably in the snow. They had been caught in the storm and in a desperate search for shelter had tried to fly through his large landscape window. Well, he couldn't let the poor creatures lie there and freeze, so he remembered the barn where his children stabled their ponies. That would provide a warm shelter, if he could direct the birds to it. So quickly he put on his coat and boots and tracked through the deepening snow to the barn. He opened the doors wide and turned on the light. But the birds did not come in. He figured that food would entice them in, so he hurried back to the house and fetched breadcrumbs and sprinkled them on the snow, making a trail of breadcrumbs to the yellow-lighted, wide-open doorway of the stable. But to his dismay, the birds ignored the breadcrumbs. They just continued to flop around helplessly in the snow. He tried catching them. He started running around, shooing the birds into the barn by waving his arms, but instead they scattered in every direction, except into the warm, lighted barn. And then he realized they were afraid of him. To them, he reasoned, I'm a strange, terrifying creature. If only I could think of some way to let them know they can trust me, that I'm not trying to hurt them, but to help them. But how? Any move he tended to make frightened the birds. It confused them. They just would not follow. They would not be led. They would not be shooed because they feared him. If only, he thought, if only I could be a bird and mingle with them and speak their language for a little while and tell them not to be afraid and show them the way to the soft, warm barn. But I'd have to be one of them then, so that they could see and hear. I'd have to be one of them so that they could see and hear and understand. At that moment, the church bells began to ring. The sounds reached his ears above the sounds of the wind, and he stood there listening to the bells. Adeste Fidelis, listening to the bells pealing the glad tidings of Christmas. And he sank to his knees in the snow. Merry Christmas, everybody. This is Michael Schurman, WMGM News.